Nassia here with Math, and we are continuing on a digital transformation journey, looking at IoT. So far, we've looked at the overall IoT best practices for connectivity, and we looked at how to make money with IoT, and we looked at how can we secure IoT. Next up, we're going to look at a use case, rather, and we're going to talk about smart cities, the tale of the smart city, and what does it mean when it involves smart connected devices. The implementation of smart cities can be quite complicated. It's not as easy as connecting a bench or a street light. It takes a lot more than that. And to help me answer some of these questions, I have another wonderful panel for you folks. And I'll start bringing them in one by one to introduce themselves. Khaled Shabrawy from Microsoft. Welcome, Khaled. Good to see you here.
Thank you, Nassia. Good to see you too. Hello, everyone.
If you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your role within Microsoft, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. First of all, hope you're all okay and safe and healthy. My name is Khaled Shabrawy. I'm based out of the United Arab Emirates, Dubai. I work for Microsoft, and I am the government and smart city industry lead. And within my role, I look after a few agenda items to work with the government of the UAE, digital transformation, smart cities, innovation and design thinking, and sustainability. And lately, of course, let's not rule out the new buzzword of metaverse as well.
Great. Thank you, Khaled. Gary Casey, who's joining us from Atsign. And Gary, welcome. If you can give us a quick intro.
Thanks, Nassia. So hi, everyone. I'm Gary. I work at a company called atsign. And our mission is to provide end-to-end secure communications between everything, every human, every entity on the planet. Big ambition, but that's where we're going. I've been an engineer for a long time, professionally, in quotes, for 32 years. Software, lots of different organizations, banks, telcos, most recently before atsign, I was at Google for a few years as an SRE director there. And I joined atsign because I think it's a really important mission, the mission of privacy in a world, an extremely highly connected world, is an important mission, and I wanted to be part of it. So thank you for having me today.
Welcome, Gary. And next up is Ciaran Flanagan from Siemens. He is the Global Head of Data Center Solutions and Services. Welcome, Ciaran. We cannot hear you. Seems that we're having a slight technical issue. We are not getting the audio from Ciaran. Hello? Maybe try unplugging and replugging your headset really quick. All right, well, we're trying to solve this. We'll circle back to make sure that we don't miss the introduction of Ciaran. But I think we're trying to solve the challenge with the audio here. I'm gonna start with something general and generic around smart cities. So Khaled, I'll come to you because part of what your role is within the ecosystem at Microsoft is looking after the smart cities, I would say, area. And when we're talking about smart cities, what are we really talking about, and why is it so important for all of us?
Great question. So, of course, whenever we have sessions about smart cities, this is always the first question to set the stage and have a common understanding of what we mean by smart cities. And to be quite honest, the definition itself and how we and the ecosystem at large is looking at smart cities keeps changing and evolving due to many factors. One of them is actually the capabilities of the technology that are available for us today. But in my personal view, I think the most important aspect of looking at smart cities is how we align it with the expectations of the citizens and the businesses living within that smart city, right? Because at the end of the day, the smart city, if you dissect the word itself, it's a smart element and it's a city, right? And here by definition, it's how do we utilize and benefit from the latest technologies like blockchain, AI, IoT, big data, metaverse nowadays, and how we live in this virtual, maybe turn it into a virtual smart city in the future. So all these technologies are available for us to use to design different experiences and different ways to allow our people and businesses to thrive in those cities and become eventually happier, healthier, more secure, and get the services that they want. So that's my personal take on the terminology of smart city and why we would want to tackle it as a domain versus looking at different silos within the governments or the places where we live at. And definitely we'll look at more deep dive areas of the smart city as we move through our discussion.
Great, thank you, Khaled, and welcome back, Ciaran. And I think I can
Thank you.
hear you now, so let's come back to you. If you can give us a quick intro of yourself, and then perhaps answer the question of what you think is smart cities as well, and why is important for all of us.
Sure, Nassia. Yeah, apologies. I seem to have had some technical difficulties. Yeah, my name's Ciaran. I'm based in Dublin in Ireland, and I lead the Siemens business that serves the data center industry. So the hyperscalers, the colocation providers, and the large enterprises. And really our focus is on electrification and automation, really preparing the critical infrastructure, for the data center industry. Fascinating industry to be involved in. I've been involved in it for many years. A big focus for us is to make sure anything that we work with our clients on, anything we sell to our clients, is IoT enabled, is contextually aware of its environment, and more this discussion is developing into a discussion about smart cities. I think the whole debate around smart cities, thankfully has started to become a little clearer for everybody in business. Possibly we've seen some of the smartness around our cities, in the COVID pandemic with the ability of some of the big data center operators to allow us to work from home and work remotely and do all sorts of funky things. But I think if you step back and think about what is a smart city going to be about in the future, it really is the beginning of that discussion, if you like, about what the future of work, the future of living is. Better resource utilization, responding to the mega trend of urbanization. Today I think 70% of greenhouse gas emissions come from cities. Today, 50-60% of the world's population live in cities, and that's increasing. So I think there's an expectation that cities can continue to accommodate more and more people, but not necessarily consume more and more resource. So that's kind of the backdrop here. So I think about things like quality of life for the inhabitants. I think about sustainability. I think about security and safety. And I think cities are also looking to develop economic advantage from being smarter. So all of these themes play in there. And clearly there's a big data element, there's a big security element, ergo there's a big data center element.
Of course, and the expectation is that life within the city, umbrella will become more and more efficient and more automated. People, in terms of we don't have patience to wait for things, so we want everything to be as connected as possible. In one small area, so it can automate and enhance that part of life in the cities back. So Gary, I'll come to you and continue on this path and start to explore what are some of the key elements that would make really the city environment smarter.
Yeah. So I echo everything Khaled and Ciaran have said already. The mega trends are real, and of course we have lots of pressures in the world and our resources. Um, and the advantage of going last or coming third in a conversation at the start is that you get to say a few new things. So um, I guess I'll just state the obvious. Um, so adding devices and sensors to a city doesn't make it smart. Simply making the city more efficient in terms of its operations doesn't make it smart. What makes it smart, and again, echoing what's been said already, is when the citizens become involved, and the data that's provided by those sensors is used not just to streamline the city's operations, but to really improve quality of life for the citizens. And a huge part of smartness, right? I said, just adding sensors doesn't make something smart. What makes us smart is learning and the feedback loops. So when you take all this increasing quantities of data from individuals and their smartphones, from the devices in their homes, from the devices that are on the lampposts, in the water pipes, and you start to put that into training, into machine learning training, and generate insights and generate inferences that can be used to improve the system. Basically, you're creating that learning feedback loop. And so, making the city smart means you have to have people and things who are receiving that stream of data and processing it and coming up with insights about how to make things better. And it's, I think, for example, big problems we have is how do we make sure all that data is secured? How does it get to the right place? How are we making that training data available not just to the hyperscalers who are key in acquiring it, storing it, and making the training resources available to do the training, but how do we expose that to other folks, research scientists, or anybody who wants to make use of that data to try to improve things? So I think, in terms of how do we make cities smart, it's joining up everybody in creating that feedback loop. You need the sensors, you need the people to be engaged and figuring out what are the problems that they would like to see solved. You need all sorts of technology companies involved in providing network and providing compute and data storage and machine learning training. And all of that needs to be turned into a learning feedback loop.
Great. And I think this is also what you're mentioning. It absolutely makes sense. I mean, it's not just connecting things that would make the city smart. It takes a lot more than that. And sometimes we underestimate the human element, when we're talking about smart cities. Khaled, what are the key collaborators? What do we need to make our environment in a cityscape smart?
Very good question. Of course, Yani, since we're all living in the city, then the key collaborators becomes the key, let's say, contributors. Number one, to the data, who gives data into the city, and how we acquire the data also from the interactions of the city. And namely, in my view, I think that there is 6 key entities within a city ecosystem that have to collaborate together, so that they provide the required, I would say, and going back to some of the elements that Gary and Ciaran said around the livability and workability elements of the city. So looking at the utilities entities inside the city, these are key contributors to the services that citizens benefit from and businesses benefit from. Transportation, right? Municipal services, healthcare services, security services, and education. So this, in my view, these are 6 key, let's say, contributors and collaborators when they share the data among each other, when they have data collaboration among each other, when they look at how we deliver citizen journeys and services to the citizens together. I think those, along with the technology providers as well, because they support those entities with the latest and greatest, devices, sensors, big data platforms, AI platforms, and so on, so that they can contribute to the delivery of the services successfully. So I think a mix between the entities that provide services for the citizens and businesses themselves, the technology providers, and as well as last but not least, the let's say the regulator and the regulatory bodies within the city. So four domains that when they collaborate together, we have a good chance of providing successful smart city scenarios and services to the citizens.
Great. And we hear quite a bit from hearing from every single one of you that data, a lot about data, along with who the key collaborators are. And I mean, when it comes to connected devices and IoT, really the king is the data and what we do with our data. So coming to you, Ciaran, and if you, I think from your perspective, and we're looking at the data centers, but also how can we support the whole data through the data centers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, if you extrapolate let's say the appetite of the generation of data, clearly there's a big demand for data to be hosted in the smart cities or in relation to smart cities. But there's kind of a couple of trends emerging with that as well. Some years ago there was a big push to move data centers out of cities, and that's, from a networking point of view, that's still okay. But there's also now a trend to bring some of the data centers back into the cities, because some of the data center infrastructure itself can be shared with the city. So the electrical infrastructure can become part of the city grid. The cooling infrastructure can become part of the comfort or the quality of life, or the comfort for the people in the city. So there's use cases emerging in smart cities that maybe we hadn't thought about some years ago, and they're now starting to come to the fore. I think as we build out the data centers in the cities, the challenges remain the same. I mean, we want to have a lot of interoperability with the data. We want to make sure the data is secure. And I think what's going to be fascinating for industry generally is how new business models, new ways of doing business will emerge. I look at some of the work that people like Microsoft, Khaled's company, and AWS and Google are doing in engaging with smart cities, and they've been quite They've been quite bold in their vision up front. I think as we look at the commercial realities emerging, there's still some discussion about who's going to pay for what. Because in the past, if you were doing something like Facebook, everything was virtual. You could do it from one data center in Ohio. But now, because of devices, because of regulation, because of the interaction with the people in the cities, there will be services required to really tool up those cities. But the data center industry will adapt. I mean, we will have big data centers, we'll have small data centers, and they'll be fit for purpose depending on the application.
Great. And Khaled, your thoughts on this, because you guys at Microsoft, especially from the hyperscaler perspective, they're doing quite a few things. So what can we do there?
Yeah. So definitely, and I think so Microsoft was the first hyperscaler to open in the UAE and the region, and what I've witnessed is, number one, of course, the hyperscalers provide a very key ingredient for the smart cities, which is the innovation and the technologies that is powering the use cases and the citizen ambition and the city official ambition. So this goes without saying, and it's a clear benefit of the existence of hyperscalers. Now, definitely, as Ciaran mentioned, when the hyperscalers operate with sustainability in mind, then they can also contribute to the national agendas of those cities in terms of how to give back to the grid, how to preserve the environment, how to make sure that the operations of those hyperscalers in the countries are adding value from the sustainability element and not just consuming the power and energy and waste and so on. The other two elements that I feel are very important when it comes to the contribution of hyperscalers in cities is, number one, the contribution to the digital economy, because with the hyperscalers comes a huge ecosystem of jobs that are created to serve the hyperscalers and to serve the solutions and the technologies coming out of the hyperscalers, right? So this is very important to address. The other element that I feel also is important is, which is also relating to the digital economy, is how bringing those technologies into cities creates new jobs. And when you help skill and upskill the citizens and the people living in those cities, you contribute to reducing the unemployment rate and so on. So it's not just about the commercial angle of hyperscalers selling their services to the cities, but also how we give back in terms of the contribution to the economy, the sustainability angles, and so on and so forth.
You're on mute, Nassia.
We can't hear you, Nassia. Sorry.
Apologies about that. I've had, as you can see, I had to change quite a few elements on the setup. We are having the highest heat day in London, and the devices, after being on since this morning, decided to turn off. So, well, we're back and I'm audible again. So, continue with what Khaled had mentioned, and he mentioned sustainability amongst many other things. And this is an area that is been highlighted as key when it comes to making the cityscape a lot smarter, because it will aid with the whole sustainability debate and question, and of course the collaboration throughout the different entities. And Gary, how do you see it? Can we make the cityscape sustainable and smart?
So I'm going to talk about sustainability from two perspectives. So one is, what we always talk about, which is, I think primarily is it's sustainable from an ecological, economic, perspective, i.e., is the city itself sustainable? And there, I think, it's really important that, again, that citizens be engaged. If the solution isn't going to be, one huge control room that is making all the decisions and telling the city what to do. The intelligence is very much distributed into local communities, self-organizing communities who maybe want to organize a better composting regime for their neighborhood, or better waste collection, or better recycling. Federating that intelligence and making sure that we don't optimize for a centralized intelligence is really important. And in turn, that leads to sustainability, because, we know that in ecosystems, heterogeneity is really important for a thriving ecosystem. So having different communities be able to do their own thing, within an overall framework, and then exchange data about how those experiments, if you like, are working, is really important for the sustainability. That innovation, and again, that learning loop, which is a big theme for me, is really important. And I trust that from that will come sustainability, because the citizens, the neighborhoods are the engine of the city, and they will want to make the city sustainable. So giving them what they need, and allowing them to run experiments, I think is key. The other part of sustainability, though, I'll talk about from my software engineering background, which is sustainability of all of this tech, and that's a real issue. When we put sensors into things, they have operating systems, or they have firmware, they have communication protocols, they have things they need to keep on top of. They need maintenance, they need administration, and managing that full life cycle is really important. And we also need to be aware of the danger for kind of black swan events, or somebody said that complex systems are always on the edge of chaos, right? And I can't think of a more complex system than a really smart city. In that situation, we need to be aware of where the butterflies are flapping their wings, and respond to that really quickly. And again, that's a key element of the sustainability, knowing when something is going wrong. And I'll leave you with one last thought, which is, how do you regression test a smart city? Right, you kind of can't. So being aware of, how do you introduce the experiments? And how do you have sufficient feedback and monitoring in place to be able to detect the results of those experiments in near real time, so you can switch it off if it's going badly wrong? I think is a really important thing. We're not in a world where we can predict the outcomes of really many actions that we take in smart, complex systems. So I think that's going to be really important.
I think you covered a lot of elements there. Gary, and you've given us an overall, I think, way of looking at how can we make the cityscape more sustainable. Gary, from the data center's perspective, there is an element that we need to look at sustainability as well, which of course it benefits in the whole cityscape, because without looking at what we're doing with the data itself, you don't have the infrastructure requirements that are needed to feed the whole ecosystem of a smart city. So can we make the data centers and therefore smart cities sustainable?
Sorry, the data centers themselves?
Yes.
That's an interesting question. I mean, so Ciaran has mentioned some of it, that integration into the broader energy system of a city, and we have to trust as well that some of this will be. There are lots of industries, lots of companies around the world who are continuing to invest in more outcome, more compute, more storage for less input energy, less input mass. Ken Kelly, I think, said that we need less mass all the time to do more things, and I think that trend is going to continue. So I think fairly simplistically, it is about that integration that Ciaran mentioned. I think that's really important. Yeah. And we have to trust that our innovation is going to continue. I was reading this listening to a podcast the other day about DNA and for data storage, and it's very early days, but this technology is actually working now. Now it's only good for what they call cold data, but in theory, you could store everything we currently have on the internet. If it was all DNA, you could cram it all into a shoebox. All of those disk drives all around the world. Now, when you think about that kind of leap of capability, I think there's enough room here for us to be able to continue to make our data centers more efficient and thereby more sustainable.
Indeed. And same question to you, Khaled, because I know you want to add something to this. And then, Ciaran, I will ask you the same question, because it would be good to have everyone's perspective on this.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Nassia. What I wanted to add is, of course, data centers and data centers operated by local hosters within the smart cities or hyperscalers operating in the smart cities. I think data centers is one of the huge consumers of energy and contributing to the environmental issues within smart cities nowadays. Because look at the massive amount of technology and compute power that generates heat and waste and uses water for cooling and consumes energy, right? So it's a huge amount of work that needs to happen for data centers to become more sustainable. The angle that I wanted to address as well is, of course, there's a lot of practices and a lot of innovations happening to power data centers using renewable energy, be it solar or wind or battery cells and so on. And also even on the cooling element, and even us as Microsoft, we've been experimenting how to submerge data centers in the oceans and seas to make the cooling element more natural, rather than using other means that might let's say have negative impacts on the environment. But also I think the new thing that I'm seeing and that is being part of sustainability is the circularity element. So how can we also use the circular economy and use the factories that can circulate and recycle electronic waste as well, because electronic waste coming from data centers and hyperscalers is massive. Imagine a hard disk and cables and equipment, because they're also cheap, and because the massive operations of data centers today, you don't tend to fix it. You just take it, you throw it away, you put in new stuff, and you restore from backups or continue as the resilience of the data centers and so on. So what happens to those electronic waste elements? This needs a little bit more emphasis on how we build circular plants beside or within cities to circulate those electronic wastes. So that's maybe an angle that I wanted to highlight.
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
before Ciaran, you jump in, I just want to say as well that the circular economy across the entire ecosystem of connected products, not just the smart cities stake, it is very important, because there is more and more electronic wastage that we are producing as societies overall. And Ciaran, coming to you now, same question, sir.
Yeah. So just to go back to something Gary said, I think you made a really good point, Gary, about the efficiency of the workloads. And the IEA have fairly recently published a report where they showed over the last, I think, 4 years, while we've continued as an industry to increase capacity in terms of workload, we've not consumed any more electricity than 2018. So I think on the workload side, for sure, there's potential there for even more efficiency. And I think by bringing those workloads into that smart city context, we'll find new avenues for efficiency. We flip then to the consumption side, and that's where it gets, I guess, a little bit more complex. I mean, clearly, if the data center can get access to 100% certified renewable energy, that's a huge benefit, because in the life cycle of a data center, 80% of the carbon impact is in the operational phase. The reality is we're not there yet. So I think we need to be honest. The data center industry, like every other industry, is on a journey to decarbonize. There are leaders in the market and there are laggards in the market, but generally speaking, the industry is going that way. But I would sort of pose my response a little bit differently. Then I would think, if the city is smart, I would rather the smart city focused on energy generation as an entity, and that the data center would be part of the consumption side of that entity, because it's not really going to be so smart if the data center is using carbon-free energy, but the local mass transit system still has to use energy from a coal-fired power station. So I think this is actually the benefit of the smart city, by sharing the loads, by putting all the loads into one system. When things are busy in one element of the city and not in the other element of the city, you can drive more and more efficiencies. So the short answer is absolutely, the data center can be operationally carbon neutral if we can get access to enough carbon neutral energy. Some operators will generate their own to some degree, but largely speaking, I think we need to look at power generation at the smart city level, so everybody can benefit, not just single elements.
Great answers, and I'm happy that we had a chance to cover a little bit more the sustainability aspect, especially from the data center perspective and also the smart city perspective. And we are having 5 minutes left in our session. I think it would be important for us to look as smart cities evolve. What does this really mean for the IoT ecosystem? And I will come to you first, Gary, then same question to you, Khaled, and we'll finish with you, Ciaran.
So I think I'll go back to something I think both Khaled and Ciaran mentioned, which is data security and interoperability. And in the IoT world, we're going to have more data coming from more independent places than we've ever had before. That trend is inexorable. And I'm not saying that every smart city needs to be backed by millions of sensors. Sometimes the city can increase its intelligence by doing fairly simple things like detecting COVID in wastewater, which is a massively smart thing for cities to do. It would require massive investment. But nonetheless, there are all sorts of other things where IoT is going to be everywhere. When you have that, the data needs to be secured, because the potential for attack for bad actors is significant. If you choose the right sensors to spoof, to attack, to either seize control of them or spoof their outputs, disconnect them and then spoof their outputs. You choose the right sensors, you have the opportunity to create very bad outcomes. So, non-repudiation of data is really important. Can you assert strongly that the data that this piece of data here definitely came from that device and only that device and wasn't invented by somebody else? And that zero trust model is perpetuated then through the chain. So you're always verifying the provenance of the data. And that data provenance is a really big deal for IoT. So it's both about securing the device itself from attack, but securing the data so that it's cryptographically secured, if you like, so that it is signed, it's known, it's strongly known where the data came from. That the network is secured. So when you have millions of devices, the network transmission is going to become very important. Noisy neighbors, again, think about bad actors, whether deliberate or not. If you have a very noisy neighbor on a network, it can throw the whole network into disarray. So you have to have management of the entire ecosystem that the IoT devices are playing in. The other part is interoperability. As you'd expect from the company that I'm working with, data interoperability, especially for the long haul, needs to be at I think we need formalized protocols that say this is how we're going to exchange data, because that's going to be fundamental and it's going to be around for a long time. As I was mentioning earlier about the entire long-lived life cycle of the technology.
Yeah.
So those for me are the critical bits.
Excellent. And Khaled?
Yeah, so I know we don't have much time left, and I want to leave a few minutes for Ciaran as well. So the main thing that I wanted to highlight moving forward is the conversions, and I want to see more technologies and use cases that marry the benefits of IoT with its whole ecosystem, be it sensors, the monitoring, the feedback, the amount of data that we can recognize from all aspects of operations of a city, along with the coupling with the AI and blockchain technologies as well. Because here there will be a huge set of use cases, be it to monitor the cold chains in cities, supply chains, security elements, all sorts of areas where when we couple those IoT sensors and the data coming from it and apply the machine learning technologies and the blockchain as well, I think this is where we can really increase the, let's say, responsiveness and efficiency of the city towards the citizen services. So instead of looking at things as silos, either from the services that are being delivered or from the technologies, but converge everything together, then we can recognize and uncover new use cases and new scenarios for the citizens.
Fantastic. And Ciaran, your closing notes.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Nassia. I mean, I think to go back to what Khaled and Gary said, if we can get to a point in the future where we've truly got interoperability and we can trust the data, I would be confident that entrepreneurs and businesses will find ways to make that data relevant and make it useful for the citizens. But I suppose in my romantic view, I mean, from a citizen's perspective, the real test is whether the smart city makes the quality of life better for the citizen, whether that's related to transport or water quality or carbon, whatever it is. But that's the real test. The city's truly smart when the citizen has a better experience.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very great summary to end this session. The city is truly smart when the citizen has a good experience. I like that. That's a tweetable moment right there. Khaled, Gary, Ciaran, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this City of Smart Cities. You have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, folks.
Thank
Bye
you.
for now.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thank you.